Hello, hello. How are you doing? I'm Cass and you are listening to Hills FM. Today, I am bringing you something exciting. Joining me in the studio today is Shaniece Martin. Shaniece is a poet currently studying at Coventry University for a PhD in Indian and English poetry. She has self-published 2 collections of poetry, one called Darkness Before the Light, and the second one is Journeying Through Grief, which you can find on Amazon or the Kindle store. Her first poetry exhibition is coming to the Central Library in Coventry City Centre on the 23rd of May. The exhibition will display her poetry written as part of her PhD, which showcases her own navigation of identity, and it's influenced by her grandparents who migrated from Kenya to Coventry in 1970. If you feel like this is your jam or you want to support, make sure you check it out on the 23rd of May. But without further ado, hi!
Hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm excited. I'm excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I don't think you have done anything like this.
No, radio, I've not dabbled into that yet, so
No.
I'm excited.
I think the only microphone you've been close to is an open mic one.
Yeah, that's the one I'm now familiar with. That was once the scariest microphone to get up to.
Yeah, but yeah, you look really comfortable in the studio, so that's nice.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know, Shaniece is here in the studio with us.
Woo!
Yes. And well, Shaniece and I know each other from uni.
Yeah.
We went on the same course but different years. Because not to call you old, but you're older than me.
Yes. Thanks for that reminder.
And but Shaniece is many things, but above all else, she's a very talented poet.
Aww.
And she's published. And
Trying.
no,
I'm successful.
Yeah, right, yeah, you are. Loads of people know you here in Cov. But yeah, you have an exhibition coming up, so that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
But first of all, how did you get into writing?
So I got into writing because I feel like poetry can be a really cathartic thing for everyone, but I got into it because unfortunately when I was about 18, I lost one of my close friends, so it's a sad start to poetry, but I really didn't know how to handle a trauma like that, so I really turned to writing, and then I sort of started to then notice more poetry out and about, which really encouraged me and made me think, maybe this is quite a cool thing to be doing and quite a trendy thing, but it also made me feel a lot better in myself when handling really tricky situations. And then when I started university at Coventry, I saw people writing poetry, heard more about it through the creative writing, and thought, I really want to give this a good go. So I kept writing about anything that came my way, any thought that came into my mind, and then obviously stepped up to the mic at Fire and Dust, which for those of you who don't know, get yourself to know. It's the best open mic in Coventry, and yeah, we met there, didn't we?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I sort of got into writing and how it progressed, really.
Yeah. So how has your writing developed in terms of themes and what you talk about and stuff?
Yeah, so I think I've always had this sort of very emotive side to poems, from where they started to where they are now and what they'll look like at my exhibition as well, is they always come from the heart. It's always about something that I've experienced, because what better to write about than what you know, but also what people around me have experienced. I think the themes have sort of very much developed to be more about my identity, my family's voice, the people that I want to represent in my poems as well, rather than just sort of being very short poems that sort of look good on Instagram. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So how do you feel like talking about Instagram, how do you feel you've separated your online presence to being more, the classic poet that just goes to open mics and
Yeah, I think when I first started writing poetry, I remember braving it and posting one of my poems in my little scrawny handwriting one Saturday night and being like, I'm just going to post this out here for the world to see. And, my 50 followers saw. And then I thought, I saw the likes of Rupi Kaur and things like that, really making it on Instagram, and thought, I'm going to make my own, Instagram, my poetry account. And I got really hooked to it. But the problem is that when I got so hooked, I then felt like all I was writing for was Instagram. So when I got up to the mic, some, you know, open mic nights felt not so good because they weren't a performance, because it was just written for Instagram. So I've really had to battle between, you know, writing for Instagram and performing and sort of bringing them together. But I think it's been about 7 years since I first started writing poetry now.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've got on this journey and my poetry's in a place where I want it to be performed and heard and also be accessible on Instagram, but finding that route can be challenging.
Yeah, definitely. And talking about, you know, performing things that you've created for the internet, you know, with the pandemic and stuff, how did you find that balance between performing for an audience and performing online?
So I really missed that, you know, when you step up to the mic and, you know, they say your name and everyone claps, and like you just miss that community. You know exactly what it's like when you get up to that mic and you see those familiar faces, those new faces, those people that you never thought would hear your poetry. And then when you're online, it's like you don't get to see who is watching and who is noticing you. I did a few Instagram lives based on like themes that I was writing about, because I thought it gives people something to do, but also it gave me something to do, which was nice, because when it's live, you know, people are tuning in as they go. But again, you know, it's not as many people. It was probably about 10 people that came to those lives, because I'm not Instagram famous, and it's really hard to build a community on there. So I think it was great. It was a great time to sort of realise what I wanted to gain, and that's where I sort of took a step back from Instagram a little bit, and sort of thought I don't want to be online as much, and I want to be in the moment, in the physical, as much as I can when we were coming out of the lockdown and the pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. I obviously was one of the people that tuned into your live Instagrams because I'm a massive fan, of course.
My biggest fan.
I'm always there supporting. But yeah, you know, like how you said that you've been like writing for like 7 years. What was the point in those 7 years that you were like, right, I want to get published now?
I think once I'd stepped up to the mic and done it as spoken word, because when I first started writing, I didn't show anybody, you know, I barely showed my parents or whoever, no one saw it. And then it's not until I put it on Instagram and then, you know, got some positive comments and then stepped up to the mic and thought, there's a community out here, there's people that I want to sort of be able to read this work, and for it to not just be mine and me claiming it. I want it to be relatable, I want it to be out there for other people to read when they need it, just as much as when I need it. So I thought I really want to go and get it published, self-published, and sort of do the work and sort of reap a reward, and not financially by any means, but by means of being able to connect with as many people as possible.
So can you talk about like the books, the collections that you have published already?
Yeah, so my first collection was called Darkness Before the Light, because that was like this poetry, you know, persona that I sort of gave to myself when I think I was like, I'm not ready to be Shaniece the poet yet. You know, you try and put that as a separate part of you when you're not 100% sure. So that collection was kind of a very low-key collection, but it was kind of a mixture of everything. I wasn't really going for a theme. I just thought, I'm gonna put my poetry out into the world and let's see what happens. And then my second collection was definitely when I felt like I had a purpose. So my second collection was called Journeying Through Grief. It came out in 2020, so I brought it out in the pandemic, and it's a journey through grief. When I lost my granddad, it'll be 3 years ago this month now in May, and it was basically, you know, I was been going through this grief for a while, you know, for a year at that point, and I thought, although this is a really sad time for a lot of people when the pandemic hit, and a lot of people were unfortunately going through that same emotion, I thought, why not offer this out to people, you know, as a guide to be like, it's hard, it's really hard, but it's a journey and it does get better. So yeah, I released that. I sold, I think it must have been about 100 copies when I was doing when I just released it, and then all the profits and proceeds from that book went directly to the NHS, because every bit of penny and bit of money that I made from it, I just thought this deserves to go back to the people that are doing everything they can right now. So that's a collection that's really close to my heart and I'm really proud of. Yeah,
definitely, especially because for people that don't know yet, because you'll have to buy it to read it and see it, but the cover is actually like a drawing of you and your granddad, isn't it?
Yeah,
so
it is, and I've got it tattooed on me, so it's on me for life and with me, so it's physically a part of me and literally a part of me. So yeah, it's definitely my proudest poetry moment to date, I think.
So what are your plans in terms of publishing and stuff for the future?
I think so I've self-published on Amazon up to date. I think I really want to try and, you know, get to that level that everyone wants to get to, where they're not doing it themselves and, you know, they get maybe a publishing deal and things like that. But, you know, it's a thing to aspire to. It's not going to come overnight, but I'd love to do that. But it doesn't stop me from wanting to self-publish in the meantime. Like, I'm not doing this to make a huge like career out of this. I'm doing it because it's what I'm interested in, and if it can get me, you know, a good career, then that's great too. But I think I really want to self-publish another collection where it's got a few different chapters on a few different themes, and it's sort of a journey of growth and, you know, just becoming comfortable in your own skin, which I am by no means fully comfortable in my own skin, but it's a journey we're all on, and it's just a book that I really want to create to help as many people as I can.
Yeah, definitely. I'm obviously looking forward to it. I'm waiting for the call, being like, yeah, I got published again. But yeah, going back into the themes and stuff, because I remember when poetry was starting to get online and stuff, and everything you could read about was like love and relationships and all that. Some of it, like I don't want to sound like it's cringe. Some of it's cringe.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you want to talk about your relationships and stuff, obviously that's what poetry is for. That's like the stereotype of poetry, isn't it? Just like love poems and Shakespeare and oh my Romeo, my Romeo. But like, how did you like grow from that? Because I feel like all of us, especially us girls, have that thing where all we want to talk about is like love in our poems. How do you like realize like, oh, there's so much more to talk about than just love?
I think you know what, love is not the be all and end all. When you've had, you know, experience and dabbled into different, you know, scenarios and different aspects of love, you're like, God, this is the tiniest part of my life, and love comes in so many different ways. And I think, you know, as girls, I hate stereotypers, but we do often think of love with like Romeo and Juliet, and, you know, it has to be a very, you know,
Disney princess kind of love.
But what about like platonic love that you have for your friends, and what about you know, the love that you have for your family, and those real connections that you have that kind of do get put on the back burner with poetry a bit. You know, it's always to the love, but what about the love you have in different ways? So I thought, you know what, I'm gonna step aside from all of that and start writing about other types of love, because they're just as important. And I think a lot of people write about, you know, like a friend now, or someone that they walk past in the street that made their day, and they're the people that we need to be writing about,
definitely.
not just, you know, the partners and the Disney's princesses, you know, that kind of love, you know, Prince Charming's. That's not for me anymore, I don't think.
Not for me either, because like I said, like that's how it started as well. And I remember like the first times that I started going to the open mic to Fire and Dust, like the first poem I read was a love poem for my best friend, and it was called To My Love. And everyone after the open mic, during the breaks and stuff, and they were like, oh my God, like, is that about your partner and blah blah blah? And I was like, yeah, my partner in crime, my best friend, you know what I mean?
I remember hearing that poem and thinking, wow. And I think you definitely allow me to see that love, you can write poems about love that aren't just about this Prince Charming and princess, you know, scenario that we're brought up with. It's about the love we have for genuine people who stand by us, and your poem was amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Incredible. Yeah, so good.
It's like one of my proudest like moments, that poem.
I
remind my best friend all the time, like, I wrote this for you.
You should be like, this is my love letter to you for life.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, like continuing this conversation, like, do you find that you have themes that you're scared to talk about, or especially like perform in public?
Yeah, definitely. I think my poems actually for my exhibition, and the poems that I write in my PhD, which I'm doing at Coventry, big up Coventry, and it's on Indian English poetry, which in the simplest of terms is, you know, poetry written by those of Indian heritage writing in the English language. And I fit into that category, you know, of Indian heritage. And, you know, I come from a world where I'm half Indian and half English, so I'm, you know, battling these borders. And I can only speak from a very small perspective of those people and people that belong to that identity. But it's a very daunting task, because you don't want to say the wrong thing, you don't want to do the wrong thing, because you're representing, you know, a voice, and a voice that belongs to a lot of people out there, but still a minority. And I think it can be really hard to know whether you're saying the right thing or the wrong thing. And one of the poems in my exhibition talks about sort of casual racism that I've experienced and experienced when I worked in a pub locally to where I live. And it's a really hard poem to perform because I've only performed it once, but I don't want people to think that I'm sort of targeting, you know, this whole, you know, white versus, you know, people of ethnic minority, because I'm not. But I'm just trying to talk about what goes on in these establishments that sort of gets, you know, a blind eye, and people don't really notice, because when you're not conditioned to notice, you don't notice. But when you are and you're on the receiving end of it, that's when you notice. And it can be really challenging to say those poems out loud and offer that vulnerable voice, because you think, who am I representing, and what do I want this to say, and how do I want it to come across? So yeah, that's definitely the hardest topic to talk about, I think.
Yeah. What about, like, is there any when you write, and because you said you write introspectively sometimes, like it helps you be introspective with yourself, like, do you find yourself being like, oh my god, I didn't know this about myself, or like, that scares me that I think that of myself? Like,
yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I think poetry can, because I write so introspectively, like most poets do, I think you can really, it pulls you apart in a way, you know. It doesn't leave any room for hiding. You're analysing yourself, and you're pulling all these parts out. And I think, you know, a lot of the time we really try to be the best version of ourselves that we can be, put on a good front to everyone, and it's not until you know, dig deep that you're like, there's a darkness inside of me and a really sad place. And I think when you realise that you're not as happy as you thought you were, and you dig that out of you, it's a hard thing to dig up. It's like you've just dug up a grave and you don't know who it belongs to, and then you realise, this belongs to me. You know, I'm, you know, burying all these things so deep that they've now caught up with me. And I think that's the hardest realization to come to. But it makes the best poems, dare I say, you know, because you dig deep, you find yourself in that glimmer of that poem, and someone else sees it and they find themselves in it. So although they're the hardest parts to talk about and to read and perform, they're the ones that, you know, can connect us together. So yeah,
that's why it's darkness before the light.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I remember, like, when we went, was it last month, to the open mic and stuff, you performed that poem called Boobs.
Yeah.
And you were like, I never thought I would perform something like this.
Not at all. No, that was far too, I guess, well, it was deep, but it was far too jokey for what I ever thought I would be. And I never thought I'd get up there and read something about a body part I'm super insecure about. And, you know, to stand up in front of, you know, older generations and shout the word boobs, it's not what you expect to be doing on a Thursday night.
Definitely. Talking about older generations, how do you feel like, have you had any type of feedback that has made you think about how your poems are and how you write your poems from older generations?
I think sometimes I've had feedback from sort of family members who have been lucky enough to read my work, and, you know, people of an older generation, where they'll say, don't you think you're saying too much, or don't you think you're being too clear with what you mean, you know, because I'm not hiding behind any, you know, fancy phrases. I just say it as it is. And I'm like, that's the point, you know, that is the point in what I'm trying to say. And I think, you know, sometimes it did make me question and think, but then when you see other people doing it, especially at open mics, you're like, why can't I do this? And I think there is an expectancy, especially being like a woman, to filter certain things that you want to say, and, oh, you can't say this because you're a woman, or you can't say this because you're not supposed to. And, well, who sets those boundaries? I'd love to know. And why can't we break through them? It's about time. So I just think I'm gonna do what I want to do, and not everyone's gonna love it, not everyone's gonna hate it though. So if I love it and I'm confident with it, then that's the most important thing. If it's gonna help somebody else and help me at the same time, it's a win-win when I think about it.
Yes, definitely. And keeping with this thread, how do you feel that? Because I feel like poetry, until like very recently when it started on social media, was like quote unquote like out of trend.
Yeah.
So how do you feel like younger generations and our generation are making poetry like more known compared to how it was considered to older generations and in the past and stuff?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting thing to think about. And I think it's the fact that we are open. For one, we are majorly open, and we are unfiltered, and we're happy to be unfiltered. We're happy to put ourselves out there and be like, this is me, this is who I am, and I want you to know that. I think we're very good at having a voice and getting our voice heard, and I just think we're really not afraid. Like, we're not afraid to just speak, we're not afraid to be who we are, and to be not afraid and be fearless essentially in this in the world of creativity and poetry. It makes for the best poetry in my eyes and the best creative outputs. And I just think that's so important, and it allows us all to come together and be part of the same thing. And that's why I think we've been so successful in creating open mic nights where people attend, and it encourages everyone. It encourages every generation to come and do the same thing, because just because we're younger than certain generations doesn't mean we can't inspire them like they've once inspired us too. So I think that's what we've managed to do, is create this shift. Not us two, but we're on the way. But I think as a generation we've definitely helped to create a good shift in a positive way with poetry, where you don't have to rhyme your words, you don't need to be on a certain iambic pentameter like Shakespeare. You can just write and it's poetry.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like, well, two things, like especially us two that go to open mics and we see the variety of people that there's in the place. Like, you can see all the types of themes that you can write about. Like, we have so many poets that do jokey poems, and then there are others that really go deep into certain topics that you're like, oh my god, like I would never think to write about this. And it's just like you said, like you get to inspire each other and like make, and you get to see things from different perspectives.
Definitely.
And then I was going to say something else and I forgot what was the other point. But I think, what you said about like this standard like poetry has is like, it has to rhyme. It has to have like, I remember going to school when I was a kid and I was like analyzing the verses and stuff. And now like I remember when I started like writing poetry when I was in Cov Uni, and it was like, write however you want to write, just be creative, like let your voice out and like find your voice. So with that said, how did you find your voice?
Oh my god, that's the $1 million question in poetry. I think how did I find my voice? I think I am still finding my voice, but I think I found it to a degree where I'm confident enough in it now. I think finding your voice comes from finding who you are. I think we're always on that journey, and I think when I started writing, I was 18, and I just didn't, the person that I look back on when I was 18 is the person I am now. It's totally different. So I'd love to know where I'm going to be, in another 7 years with that. But I think you find your voice through finding yourself, and they're really tied in together. I think, you pick up your interests, you realise what's important to you in life, and you have to do a lot of self-analysis, which is why I spoke about, the poetry where you have to dig deep inside of you, and it brings up things you don't want to know, you've suppressed for so long and hope that no one finds it. But unless you accept that, you're not going to find that voice that you have inside of you, and that story that only you can tell, only you know that story. So that's what I would say, is I really dug deep and I found a voice that I'm comfortable in. It's a scary voice sometimes, it's the voice that I battle with sometimes, but it's a voice that I know can make a difference.
Yeah, definitely. And also because you've said that you are a voice sometimes to represent what you think, like what you want to represent a certain group and a certain ethnicity. So how did you come across like wanting to write about your ethnicity and your identity?
I think, for so long, I think when you are from two, very different backgrounds and identities. My mum's from an Indian background and my dad's English, and it's so hard to be both of those two things. It's so hard to know who you are, and it's so hard to explain to other people who you are. It's so hard to understand that, especially when you're young, and that's the thing that makes you stick out on the playground at school. And
Definitely.
I grew up in a very white area. I was one of the only ones on the playground of people of ethnic minority and different skin color, and I was aware of it, and I remember being really badly bullied in different scenarios, which now makes great inspiration for poetry. But it can be very challenging. But I thought if I can talk about it and make it easier for other people, but also make it easier for me, then I want to talk about it, because it's a unique voice in the sense that I've lived what I've lived by being this way and sort of representing my identity in that way. But I can also help other people who were like me. They were confused, they didn't know who they belonged to, what they belonged to, because they weren't enough of this and they weren't enough of that, and actually just showing that you don't have to be one or the other of your identity. You can actually be both and recreate it to what you want it to be.
Yeah, definitely. Because I myself, like you, I have mixed ethnicity, so I never really, like, I was aware of it, like you said, like I was aware that I was different, and that I wasn't like the other kids in my school and stuff, and you kind of like, you're aware of it, but then at the same time you're trying to hide it from yourself, because you think, if I can hide it from me, no one else can see it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I didn't like really think about like my ethnicity and like talking about it through my poetry until I met you, and I was like, oh my god, like she's talking about all of this, and why didn't I think of talking about that? And it's like you said, like poetry it's such a cathartic thing, and like especially when you see someone else like you do it, you're just like, oh my god, like oh my god, she gets me.
And that's what I think, people that listen or read my poetry about my identity, they don't need to be the same mix as me. They don't need to be Indian and English. They can be absolutely anything, but just being mixed and being of a mixed ethnicity, you can relate, and people can relate who aren't like that, and can understand the way that people from mixed ethnicities are, and what we have to go through, and the battles that we face, and just give a different outlook and perspective on something that isn't really spoken about enough, really, in this day and age, where a large portion of a population are mixed from different backgrounds. And it's something to be proud of, that we have all these mixes and combinations, I think, but it's still something that I think people don't really understand, and that we're really struggling to understand, because we feel like we don't have this freedom to be able to speak about it. So why not use a voice and use poetry where I can to talk about it?
Yeah, definitely. How, like, by writing about your ethnicity and your identity and stuff, because I know that's what you're studying, like you mentioned before, about like Indian and English poetry. What have you found that from your poetry compared to other poetry, like Indian poetry or English poetry, that you have like put into your poetry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think obviously the English language is probably the only way I touch upon generic English poetry, really. It's the language aspect, and I think the Indian aspect comes into it a lot more than that, because in my PhD research, you sort of look at how Indian poets were writing in the English language at a time when the British ruled India, so they were the colonizers essentially. And when you look back to this sort of history, I just sort of think the poets at the time were the voice. They were talking about what was going on and the brutality of it, but also who they were and what impact they wanted to make and the changes that they wanted to make. And I thought, what, this is kind of like what I want to do with my poems. And a lot of the poets sort of in the 20th century were talking about who they are and the self. And I thought, this is relating to my poetry a lot, the self and who we are in the inner world and what the outer world looks like and how we work together with that. And I think, for me growing up, even though, we're not colonized, we are to some extent, when you don't fit in, you've got something against you or something to pick on or whatever it might be, you feel like you've got something to prove. And I thought, I can't navigate this on my own. I didn't know anyone when I was young who was of mixed ethnicity. I only started to meet those like people from that sort of background when I went to university, and I was like, I want to have that voice. I want to be able to use what these poets are using and be that person, be that voice, because it's so easy to sort of think, I'm going to hide away and not talk about this. But I wanted to bring together these two sides to my identity that I have to be able to make a change.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I have no words to add to that, because yes, I agree. But like, have you, interesting question, creative question, have you like responded to like an old Indian poem with like modern, like mixed Indian English like to like answer to perspectives?
That's a very good question.
Mm.
Yes, probably once, I think, which isn't a lot considering how many poems that I have read by Indian English poets, but maybe it's something I need to do more of. But yeah, so one of the poets that I'm learning about, like I'm being taught by, I'm having to teach myself, but one of the poets that I've wrote about from the 19th century called Rabindranath Tagore, he wrote a poem called The Sunset of the Century, and it was talking about what the next decade brought, so going into the 20th century, what the next decade brought for India, what the people could do to make a better India, make a better place. And I think I wrote a poem sort of very similar to think about what would I tell the next generation of people who would come out of this century, or what would I tell myself when I was when I was born going into the 21st century and things like that, and looking at the centuries ahead. And sort of I wrote down a poem that sort of followed that, because I think it's so interesting to consider what our impact will be to then give advice to the next generation or the next century that comes along, because I just thought how time can change. And even though his poem is so old now, I can resonate with it so much, even though it's not resonating about that exact topic, it resonates in a different way. And I think then you start to learn that power of poetry, that it never goes out of date. It doesn't matter what you're writing about. If you're writing about, I'm sure, COVID will go down in absolute history, and the pandemic, and one day people, might not really know what that was, but they'll read a poem about it and they'll be able to relate to it some way, somehow. And I think that's the power, is it captures a moment, but it lasts a lifetime.
Yeah, because it's like you said, like, it's not only that poetry is timeless, it's experiences, it's human experiences, and it's like, that's why we can relate to each other so much and to other people, because it's like, you can talk with someone that's like 80 years old or 50 years old, but they've had their 20s, they've experienced some of the things that we have, and that's how you connect to people. And then if you add poetry to the mixture, it's like you can transcend, it's basically. So so going through all your poetry now, you have done something that I don't think either of us expected you to do until your PhD came about, which is you're having an exhibition and you're like giving your poetry to the world in another way that's not publishing.
I am. So it's at Central Library in town, and it's going to be up from the 23rd of May for 2 months, so it'll be up until about the 22nd of July, and I'm just so excited to be able to put poetry in an exhibition, but also give it to a community that means a lot to me. My grandparents migrated here to Coventry from Kenya back in the 1970s, so it's a place that really, really has my heart, and a place where my family started here in the UK, really.
Yeah, definitely. So what can people expect from your exhibition then?
So people can expect about 10 posters, so 10 poems, and they will be right next to the poetry section, and they'll be very bright because the posters are very jazzy, lots of different prints and images, and then the backdrop is going to be like a traditional Indian dress that covers, so it has a a nice bright feel to it, but also captures the my identity and sort of what I really want to put out there. And then around my posters of poems, there will be family photographs, because a lot of the time now I actually go through family photographs, really old ones from my grandparents, and they really inspire me. They really make me look back in time. They make me become present in a space when I didn't even exist. So I'm putting those around the poems just to really show how images and words can really work together to create a whole new artwork, really, and a whole new creativity. So yeah, I'm really, really excited for it.
How did you, what was the process of you picking the poems that you wanted to exhibit?
Yeah, it was tough. It was really tough. I think I thought, which ones represent me, which ones represent my family, and the voice that I really want to come across with. So I really want to come across with this voice that, you know, shows a mixture of things about one identity, you know, get rid of those stereotypes that everyone thinks of, but really capture what I know about it and what my family have taught me. There was this real, you know, I guess real oomph to want to show the unheard voices, because, you know, like my grandparents and their grandparents and so on would never have this opportunity to do an exhibition, probably because they wouldn't have really written poetry, but, you know, to go and show that. And I just really, really wanted to take that voice. So I looked at the poems and thought, does this do that? Yes, okay, this is the poem that I really want to showcase, because although this is about me, it's about every single person that gets to read it and can, you know, really relate to that community that I'm talking about.
Yeah, definitely. Can you give us a taster? I'm waiting for the taster.
Okay.
Give me a taster.
I'll give you a taster. Okay, I'll read this one because this one is directly about my grandma, and a lot of people I think will be able to relate to it. So it's about, just to give a bit of pre-context, because you've always got to do that with a poem. I can't just go straight in. This is about my grandma, who absolutely is obsessed with the world food aisle in supermarkets. The bigger the world food aisle, the better for her. And I remember when I was young, I used to think, oh, for God's sake, we're going down that aisle. Absolutely not. I'm going to run down this aisle. So she hurries up, and we'd always go so slow. And when I was young, I just thought, oh, she's faffing, she's taking too long. And then when you're older, you realise she's finding her community down the aisle, she's finding her home down the aisle. So yeah, this one's called The Golden Aisle. 1960s England did not offer this aisle. It is something that has taken a while. To some, it is the aisle to be missed out, the one that makes it quicker to head to the checkout, the aisle that can provide them no spice, but to my grandma, it's the ultimate paradise. Utter dal samosa appear on the golden aisle, and my grandma always stands and looks with a smile, as a place in her new home reminds her of her last, and it makes her think and reminisce of the past. It transports her back to her childhood home, where the smell of garlic and ginger would always roam. To some, it is the aisle to be missed and left behind, but it fills my grandma with nostalgia in her mind, and brings her even closer to the land that she once knew, where people would never stand in an orderly queue, because they would be busy talking all together, and this aisle allows my grandma to join in forever.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Yeah. What? Yeah. That's it. Like, yeah, thanks for listening. I'm gonna leave now. But yeah, that was amazing. That was amazing. Like, cause I was listening, obviously, like I always do. I was like trying to identify. I was like, oh my god, that's me going to the Chinese store with my mom. Yeah. Basically, you know. So basically exactly like you said. I remember when I was a kid and we would go to the Asian stores, and I would just go for like the sweet stuff, the snacks, and I would be ready. Like, I know what I want to get. You got you on my basket. I'm on the checkout, and my mom would just look and look, trying to find the one spice or the one type of noodles or the one type of vegetable. And I'm like, Mama, everything's the same. Everything is edible. Just choose one. And now I'm the one doing it. I'm like, I need this one spice. I need this, or if my dish won't be the same.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm my mom.
Yeah, you realise how you like turn into that, because I'm the same. Like, I'll go to like the Indian, you know, shops and be like, right, I now need this, this, and this because I can't cook without it, or I need this because I've not had it in so long. And like, you go down and hunt them down. And I understand like the world food aisle fascination, because I think, you know, it's this whole idea of having this international section within a section that's, you know, very normal. And I think, God, it is exciting. I love going down there and finding all different types of food to try. And I think, oh, really, like you say, you turn into that person because you think, God, I now understand and I totally get where they're coming from.
Literally, it happened to me like, I think a year ago or something. There's a Chinese store, like an Asian store in town, and I was with my mom just walking about, and I saw one packet of noodles that I hadn't had since I was 3 years old.
Oh, wow.
Because they kind of like didn't sell it in Spain anymore, and I just burst out and cried in the middle of the aisle. I was like, Mama, these are my noodles. And so like, I relate so much to that poem.
Yeah, it brings it all back.
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
Oh
really
my God.
does.
Yeah, I'm about to cry just thinking of my noodles.
Noodles are great. Noodles are great.
I know, right? But yeah, like with all of that, like obviously you're writing about a heritage and a legacy that's been passed down to you, even though it's not like family related, but not necessarily, but it's just like a whole community. So my final question to you, Shaniece, is what type of legacy do you want to leave behind with your poetry?
Wow. I think with my poetry, I just want to continue the lucky legacy that I got given to me by my grandparents and the people, all the generations that came before that, because their legacy is perfect the way it is. It was, you know, family and love and be who you want to be. And for me, that's all I want. That's all I want to do and want to be. Okay, with the addition of breaking some boundaries and, you know, causing a bit of chaos. But that for me is the main thing I want to do, is carry my family legacy with me, because without all of them and all of that, I would not be who I am right now. I want to take every opportunity that every woman in my generation and the generations before me have taught me, and keep going to show that you can be exactly who it is you want to be, and to be fearless with it, because you've got one life, one poetry career, and you got to make the most of it. And that's what I really want to do. So yeah, just keep moving forward, keep being, you know, breaking those boundaries, and hopefully inspiring some people along the way, and being relatable enough for people to think, I understand that and I relate.
Yes, definitely. Fingers crossed that, like, you know, 100 years from now they're studying your poems at school.
Fingers crossed, that'd be great.
Well, Shaniece, thank you so much for joining me today at the studio. That was fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so great to have a chat and just feel so comfortable here.
Yeah, I feel like this is what we do anyway.
It's just so normal.
Yeah, I feel like instead of being at Wagamama's, we're just in the studio talking about stuff, you know.
I know, we just left behind the food and then thought, right, let's get a microphone instead.
I mean, we still brought the food with the food aisle, so the meeting is complete. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.